It's Elena Sokova. I'm an executive director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. And my warm welcome to all of you who are here today with us in our office in Vienna, but also to those who are following us virtually from around the globe. I know we have a large number of viewers who have registered and keep joining us for the program today. As many of you know, on May 2024, the International Atomic Energy Agency will be hosting the International Conference on Nuclear Security. Shaping the future, that's the theme of this year. And it's a very timely and significant theme that provides us an opportunity to not only engage diverse stakeholders in this conversation and take stock of the current challenges that we face in nuclear security, as well as opportunities, because there are always opportunities, but also have an opportunity to actively contributing to shaping that future of the field. And I'm a significance of that title, the Shaping the Future, I think is going to be discussed throughout our discussion today. And we're very happy today to bring together a number of current kind of young professionals and rising stars in the field of nuclear security. I like to call them now generation. Sometimes people use next generation, but I think it's a little bit of an incorrect term, particularly for those who we know have already been active in the field, who are contributing to it. And it's a great opportunity to have them actually contribute to the discussion, and for our discussion today to contribute to steer a more broader and diverse discussion towards the icons and nuclear security in the field. I'm also sure that those who are joining us online, many of you are pursuing careers in the field or studies and are interested in the subject and contributing to its future. So I think that that's overall a very nice setting, both in advance of the conference, but also for the field itself. Because even though we do take stock once in 4 years at icons, but nonetheless, nuclear security is the field that requires constant attention and review of either our existing concepts and ideas, how it's implemented, but also that constantly needs that growing number of various stakeholders that define the field. And that goes both about the involvement of the young professionals, aspiring professionals, but also about having gender diversity, geographical, regional diversity, and many other representatives in the field who shape it. But before we move to the discussion itself, and I give the microphone to Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins to provide introductory remarks, I want to thank the U.S. State Department's Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation for their support of this event. And now I'm delighted to introduce Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security.
So it's great to be here, in a sense, virtually with all of you. So much good work is done at the Vienna Center. It's really great to be able to speak to all of you today. And I look forward to traveling to Vienna very soon for icons. So I want to thank the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation for bringing everybody together, the now generation, as I guess we can call everybody now. And happy that our Bureau at State Department, the International Security Non-Proliferation Bureau, could be a part of this and really promote this effort. And also for bringing in diverse international groups together on the future of nuclear security. As some of you may know, inclusiveness and diversity, I think, is key to so many things that we do in foreign policy and in the area of security as well. So I'm so glad that the Vienna Center has pulled this together. So once again, thanks to all the organizers and all of my friends there in Vienna. I'm very excited to kick off this discussion on how the next generation or now generation of nuclear security professionals, including many of you, can contribute to ensuring a safer and more secure future. In my 30 plus years of public service in the area of arms control, disarmament, and nonproliferation and international security, I have seen it contribute to many successful efforts to advance nuclear security, from funding the work of think tanks to advancing nonproliferation to leading the State Department's effort in the Obama era nuclear security summits, to leading the U.S. delegation to the first ever review conference of the parties to the amended Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material in the spring of 2022, I have seen how nuclear security has taken significant importance in strengthening the international security regime. Unfortunately, today, we still face some significant challenges in nuclear security. Some say the most significant we have seen since the Cold War. In March of last year, President Biden signed the U.S. National Security Memorandum to counter weapons of mass destruction terrorism and advance nuclear and radioactive material security. This is also known as NSM 19, and the memorandum is a high-level policy document that outlines policies and priorities the United States will implement across relevant departments and agencies to prevent weapons of mass destruction terrorism at home and abroad. This is in recognition of the fact that despite significant progress made in reduction and elimination of weapons of mass destruction and weapon usable materials around the world, material security vulnerabilities and WD terrorism threats persist. We must remain vigilant and drive further progress. The nuclear radiological threat and risk landscape is evolving, driven by geopolitical factors, as well as the role of science and technology advancements. Geopolitically, recent destabilizing behavior and irresponsible rhetoric from some state actors has stained or eroded nuclear security, setting back years of so much progress. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 and its repeated attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure and nuclear facilities have jeopardized the safety and security of nuclear and radiological material and exacerbated the risk of a catastrophic incident, while its disinformation campaigns have undercut international cooperation and assistance activities. Reducing, eliminating, and securing nuclear material, and for a majority of the world, radioactive material remain among the most effective means to prevent their acquisition and misuse. The threat and risk landscape are also impacted by the advancements and trends in the science and technology field. These include the increased global interest in choosing nuclear energy to help meet carbon emission goals, the development and deployment of advanced and small modular reactors, the expanding applications of nuclear energy, science, and technology for non-power peaceful uses that support a country's sustainable development, and the potential applications of emerging and enabled technologies, including artificial intelligence. As nuclear security professionals, we must respond to these trends and anticipate risks. For example, we can work to ensure that advanced and small modular reactors are developed and deployed in a safe, secure, and safeguarded manner, and that we proactively anticipate and address the potential threats of emerging and enabling technologies. While experts who have worked in nuclear security for years and decades can bring their experience to bear to address these challenges, some of them represent threats we have not seen before, or new takes on old threats, and we need new, creative, and diverse thinking to help combat them. That is where I believe the next generation of nuclear security professionals can have the biggest impact on shaping our future. This is a generation that brings in more voices from across the world with diverse and inclusive personnel and professional backgrounds and experiences. Your perspectives can offer new ways of thinking and new solutions. As you have heard, next month the International Nuclear Security Community will gather in Vienna for the 4th IAEA International Conference on Nuclear Security, also known as we've said ICONS. Convened at the ministerial level roughly every 4 years, ICONS is essential to sustaining senior level attention on nuclear security, broadening awareness of nuclear security priorities, and reinforcing political commitments to continue progress in strengthening global nuclear security. ICONS is also an important opportunity for countries to highlight meaningful achievements, commit to additional actions, and provide political support and direction to the IAEA on nuclear security priorities. This year, as you've heard, the theme of Shaping the Future, ICONS will feature panels and events on many of the challenges that I have noted. It will also explore opportunities to retain and develop the nuclear security workforce of tomorrow, including sponsoring 10 young nuclear security professionals to attend as part of a delegation for the future. I am optimistic that during ICONS, we will make progress toward key nuclear security objectives in the various commitments made and discussions that will take place, but our work won't end there. We will need to follow through on our commitments, live up to our statements of collaboration and coordination, and take necessary actions to ensure that at the next ICONS, we have even more successes to share than setbacks to mitigate. And at that meeting and others after it, we will continue to need a diverse next generation of nuclear security experts to help us stay on the cutting edge, ahead of the new and emerging threats we face today and tomorrow. I know you will have a fruitful discussion today, and while I am saddened that I will be missing the conversation, I hope to see many of you soon, whether that's in bilateral and multilateral meetings, at workshops, and conferences, including at ICONS, where our collective efforts to strengthen nuclear security worldwide are at play. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and have a wonderful and productive day today. And again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Bonnie, very much. I want to, well, still, are we online? Good. Looks like from the third try, I will be able to thank Ambassador Jenkins for her opening remarks, and actually already highlighting some of the themes that I think will be part of today's discussion. And also, I couldn't have had a better person to start our discussion today, because Ambassador Jenkins, not only somebody who has this portfolio currently, but it is also her experience working on these issues through the long diplomatic career, including leading the threat reduction program at the State Department for many years, also being U.S. State Representative for Nuclear Security Summits. And most importantly, I'm really delighted that we have that conversation today, both about the field and the diversity of the field. With Bonnie's remarks, because she's the founder and former executive director of the Women in Color Advancing Peace and Security organization. Some of you are familiar with it, but if not, this is a leading advocacy organization supporting women of color in the security and peace building sector that believes global issues are best approached from a variety of perspectives. And I've also been fortunate to be engaged with Bonnie for many years, both in her government and non-governmental capacities. And I know how much she values and supports women, young professionals, and aspiring experts in the field. So Bonnie, thank you very much for your remarks. But without further delay, I think we're going to jump into the program, and I'm more than delighted to pass the microphone to Sarah Case Lackner, VCDNP Senior Fellow, who will moderate the discussion today. Well, Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this introduction. I would add my thanks to Ambassador Jenkins, who I think gave a really great opening to what we're going to be talking about today. And I would add is also just generally a lovely person, as I think Elena was trying to say. I've also known her a long time and would agree with that. But moving on to today's topic. What are we here to talk about today? We're here to talk about nuclear security and the next generation of young professionals, or I really like what Elena said, the now generation. And I love that I'm looking out at this table. I unfortunately can't see those of you online, but around this table we have a lot of people who, at least to my eyes, look like the now generation. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. There are a lot of ways to think about this topic. It's frequently approached from a human resources and capacity building perspective, but it's more than that. And I'm really pleased that Ambassador Jenkins brought that out, this need for diversity, this need for new thinking. It's more than just capacity building and filling the holes. It's making change. Today, that's what I hope we'll be able to focus on, and I hope that's what our speakers will be ready to speak to us about. They're nodding, so that looks very promising. Because what is interesting to me at least, and I hope to you as well, is how this generation, this current generation, and your priorities can influence and can also steer the future of nuclear security. So all of that is to explain why I am so interested in the discussions today and why I'm looking forward to listening to all of you and moderating the discussion. So I am pleased to see that the topic resonated with so many of you, that we have so many of you in the room today, so many of you joining virtually. So thank you from wherever you happen to be. A heads up, today's event will be recorded, and a summary of the discussions and recording of all presentations will be made available on our website at www.vcdnp.org within a few days. That means you can refer back to it, and you can share it with your friends. Also a great idea. So over the next hour and a half, we'll be having what I hope is an informal and really interesting conversation with who I would like to call thought leaders in the field, two of whom are with us here today in person in Vienna, two of whom are joining us remotely. I'll introduce them one by one, so I'm not going to overwhelm you with that right now. I'd really like to get to them. But as a quick introduction, what we're going to talk about today, we can split into three topics. The first one, the past, the present, and the future of nuclear security, and the second is diversity, equity, and inclusion in nuclear security. The third is how the next generation of professionals can steer that future for nuclear security. For each topic, we're going to have a brief introduction from one or two of the speakers for a total of about 7 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to open the floor. And we're going to open the floor to questions, and we're going to open the floor to comments as well, and your thoughts, particularly for those of you here in Vienna with us. Please don't be shy, because every one of you who is joining us is here to be part of that conversation and is essential for the success of the event today. And I'm looking at you, yeah? For those of you in the room, please raise your hand if you want to give an intervention or ask a question, and give your name and affiliation. You know the drill, but I like to remind you. Unfortunately, and this is for those of you joining us remotely, due to our technology limitations, we will not be able to give you the floor. However, we do want to hear from you. Please submit your questions and comments using the Q&A function in Zoom, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. You should see it. I can't demonstrate it here. Don't use the chat function. That could cause us to inadvertently lose your question. Please put it in the Q&A. Also, depending on how many questions we receive virtually, I know there's a lot of virtual participants today. We may not be able to get to all of your questions in the time allotted. It's not because we don't think it's interesting, it's because we just have some limitations. So, the same applies for those of you in the room. A warning, I give you this now, so you will be prepared. I will give a last call for comments and questions, and we will hold to it because we don't have infinite time, and we'll have to cut it off to make sure we get to all of our really good speakers today. So we want to make sure that we have plenty of time, and if you have any questions, please, 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 we want them, but we will have to cut them off if it goes long. That's it pretty much. I will be gathering the questions in groups and directing them to the speakers. So I might point to 2 or 3 of you or gather some questions from online and then direct them to a speaker. Don't be surprised if that happens. And with that, now we are ready for the real part of the event, as I would like to move to our first speaker, Jasmine Auda. So Jasmine is the co-founder and COO of Ambit Advisory, a non-governmental organization working on security and development issues across the Middle East. Previously, she was the Deputy Managing Director at the Middle East Scientific Institute for Security, an NGO based in Jordan, and associated with the Royal Scientific Society. In this capacity, Jasmine led the design and development of programs that address chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risks to security in the region. Jasmine received an undergraduate degree in political science from the New York University, a master's in political economy from King's College London, and is currently a PhD student at King's College London. And now over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. And I'm very happy that the VCDNP put this event together, found a way to get me here in person as well, so thank you. As Sarah mentioned, I have been asked to provide some introductory remarks that can hopefully get the conversation started for our meeting today, and to frame those remarks in the context of the past, present, and future of nuclear security. If I had to give my talk a title, it would be The Myths of Nuclear Security. I thought a lot about what the best way to go about this would be. So what I'm going to do is present what I believe to be some fundamental myths when it comes to perceptions of nuclear security, and how these myths have been conceptualized in the past, and how they've developed and evolved up to the present day, and where I think they may land in the future. And just as a disclaimer, these perspectives are very much coming from my own vantage point as a nuclear security practitioner working in and based in the Middle East for the last 10 years. So the first myth is that nuclear security is an independent and standalone construct. And this myth really deals with the relationship between nuclear security and the nuclear order more broadly. I was personally introduced to nuclear security as the apolitical younger sibling of the nuclear world, and this is something that I really do believe in, I think to a large degree, that it's not as burdened by some of the political considerations that plague something like the non-proliferation regime, for example. But I do think that it's still critical for us to recognize that from the perspectives of many countries, there is still a very clear link between nuclear security on the one hand and non-proliferation and even disarmament on the other. And I think we often lose sight of the fact that nuclear security really began as an extension to the non-proliferation regime. We know that the NPT, which sets out obligations for nuclear weapon states to conclude safeguards agreements with the IAEA, was set out to prevent diversion of nuclear material for non-peaceful uses. And based on that, the IAEA developed an information circular on safeguards, INFCIRC 153, and this set the basis for nuclear material accountancy. And today, this remains a core element of the nuclear security regime that we have. The sort of following developments were that there was a recognition that safeguards don't actually account for physical protection of material and facilities from theft or sabotage, and this then led to the development of INFCIRC 225 on the physical protection of nuclear material. Now, I give this sort of background because I think that this relationship between nuclear security and non-proliferation and disarmament can be seen at play today, especially when considering the intersection of nuclear security and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and this fundamental question of whether nuclear security is built upon cooperative or restrictive objectives. I think that nuclear security rightly promotes the notion that enhanced nuclear security measures can be an enabler to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy by enabling trust and confidence in a country's nuclear power programs. But from the perspective of some countries, many of which happen to be in the global south, in the Middle East, there is a fear that additional instruments can potentially impact countries' right to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which some view as already being under threat. So in the future, and to address this relationship and its potential impact on the promotion and strengthening of nuclear security, I think we have to do a couple of things. The first is that there does need to be a more vocal recognition of nuclear security and its place in the broader nuclear order. And this means acknowledging and not dismissing claims or statements that are made by states that link these concerns regarding nuclear security to, in particular, concerns with, say, the progress of disarmament. This point about how the presence of nuclear weapons undermines nuclear security that's made by a lot of states really gets to the core of one of the main issues that we see with the nuclear security regime, which is that it only covers civilian nuclear material, for example. And this all ties to the perception of the sort of uneven progress between non-proliferation and disarmament, and where does nuclear security fit at all, if at all, in this equation. And I think that this also means that in the future, we really need to see nuclear security figure more prominently in relevant non-proliferation and disarmament fora and general discourse. And the second point is that we need to continue to shift the focus on nuclear security to a cooperative rather than restrictive undertaking. This is something that's already well underway by efforts that highlight how nuclear security can enable peaceful uses of nuclear energy, but it can also be undermined sometimes by the emphasis on issues that are core to nuclear security, like preventing nuclear terrorism. And I'll get to that in my second point. So the second myth I want to talk about is that nuclear security is a Western and particularly American obsession, let's say. And I really think that this perception is probably a lot more rampant than we recognize. And I know that there's a tendency to dismiss it as being, conspiratorial or biased, or even just due to a lack of understanding or awareness about what nuclear security actually is. And even though I am stating it here today as a myth, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be taken seriously, because I really think that this comes down to the perception of the adequacy of the nuclear security regime in general. And looking to how this myth came into being requires us to sort of look to the evolution of nuclear security and how it came about. And there's the general recognition that there were three main milestones when it comes to nuclear security. I won't go into detail with them now, but the first was the development of INSCIRC 225 in the mid-70s. The second milestone was concerned with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the late 80s to the early 90s, and a narrative that we're all very familiar with about material out of regulatory control. But it wasn't until the terrorist attacks of 9/11 that the threat of nuclear terrorism came to the forefront, which marks the third milestone in nuclear security's evolution. And even though the attacks didn't utilize any nuclear material, they did highlight the potential risk and capability of terrorists that are seeking mass destruction methods. And for more on this last point especially, and kind of on the Western perspectives to nuclear security, I would encourage everyone to read the article by my virtual colleague, Alkis, on non-Western perceptions to nuclear security. But this brings us now to the present day, and it's clear that the current iteration of the nuclear security regime that we have is very heavily influenced by this third milestone. So when we sometimes see this pushback on nuclear security and the overemphasis on nuclear terrorism, it's often in the context of this being a Western-dominated construct that simply does not resonate across the world. And this is obviously, it's nothing new, and we see it time and again. There is an ongoing discussion and acknowledgement that threat perceptions vary, and they significantly influence countries' conceptualization and implementation of nuclear security. And this is sometimes due to lack of awareness of the threat, I agree, but it can also sometimes be due, and this is what I think is more worrying, to a more explicit rejection of the narrative of the credibility of the threat. And today, I don't think there's enough acknowledgement of the fact that, yes, this is essentially based on threat perceptions that were developed in a Western context, and then to have that be the basis to go on to say that this doesn't mean that the threat is not relevant, or it's not real, or that it needs to be addressed. And then, against the backdrop of all this, with some questioning the salience of the threat, in parallel, there are also other trends that have the potential to significantly impact nuclear security, including questions on the adequacy of the current nuclear security regime, and this fundamental principle that non-state actors are the main perpetrator that we need to protect against, and also this general state of affairs and the different security risks that countries are contending with that have the potential to further divert governments' attention and resources away from nuclear security toward addressing more immediate threats. And in terms of how this can impact nuclear security in the future and what we should do about it, I can understand why in the face of such reactions and perspectives, the immediate reaction would kind of be to double down with the messaging that, nuclear security is a democratic regime, it's the responsibility of the state, but I really think that as a community, we would benefit from a more nuanced approach that's grounded in understanding about countries' different perceptions. And this is not at all meant to be dismissive of all the efforts and initiatives that are being done by the IAEA, by NGOs on the need to tailor nuclear security and have it be based on national and regional needs and requirements. But from my view, I think part of what may be holding back these efforts is the fact that nuclear security still has not been elevated to the status of a global norm in the way that something like non-proliferation has. We have this nuclear taboo when we talk about non-proliferation and disarmament. The same does not exist for nuclear security, I think. So this is an event on the next generation. I haven't lost sight of that. So what does any of this have to do with the next generation? I think what both of these myths that I mentioned have in common is that they have the potential to be addressed and overcome. And I really do think that the next generation is probably the best suited for the undertaking. Now generation, excuse me. I always try to have a positive and sort of constructive take on the issues and to not be an alarmist, but I really think that these two myths or perceptions of myths that I've mentioned can substantially cripple the nuclear security regime if they lead to it being perceived as inadequate or irrelevant or just another iteration of a Western global order that unfairly constrains and restricts some states and their interests. So, enter the next generation. I know my fellow panelists will be going into more detail about kind of the concrete ways and approaches that this community can address nuclear security challenges in the future. But in the context of these myths that I've mentioned, I think in general, this generation is not afraid of challenging existing preconceptions. I recognize that the myths I've said may be, a bit out there, maybe, and is doing a pretty good job at calling out inequities. And this is alongside the growing trend of seeking to amplify marginalized voices, whether those may be from countries from the Global South, for example, or from communities that are not traditionally represented. And this sort of next, our generation's commitment to enhancing DEI, which I know Viviana will be discussing more. Enhancing the diversity of the field goes beyond just the workforce, but also extends to the diversity and inclusion of thought, of viewpoints, and of perspectives, and how these can impact nuclear security in the future. And I will end there, and I look forward to the discussion and to my fellow panelists' remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. That was really useful. I think it served as a great introduction to the kind of things we're going to be talking about today, because you managed to touch on, without going too deeply into, all of the topics that will be here. And what I found particularly interesting, and I want to know what you found interesting, I could start with your comments about inclusivity, cooperation, and ensuring that we're talking about a truly global concept of nuclear security into the future. That's at least what I noticed the most. But turning to all of you, is there anyone in the room? We have one or two questions already from the virtual participants, but I'd like to start in the room. So you want to start with your question, please? Yeah, you have to take the microphone or they can't hear you, so that's a bit of a challenge.
Hi, my name is Sana. I'm currently an intern in the IAEA. Thank you for your presentation. I really liked how you structured about your presentation on debunking some of the myths that we have on nuclear security. So my question is, in your opinion, how do we move away from the myth that secrecy equals security? There is a general perception within upper levels of governments that the more secretive nuclear program is, the more secretive their nuclear program is, the stronger is their nuclear security program. So, and this is the reason why, in general, broader public or civil society is restricted from participating in a lot of the decision-making processes, who, in my opinion, are equal and important stakeholders. So they are restricted in participating in these discussions on matters that affect them. So how do we sort of promote the idea that the more transparent a nuclear program is, the better it is for their own nuclear security arrangements? Thank you.
Oh, we got a couple.
So, yes, one more comment before we go. No.
Thank you so much. My name is Adriana. I'm from the OSCE. I don't have a question, but I just want to concur that everything you mentioned is what I've heard all the time from states. I work as a regional coordinator on the implementation of the Resolution 1540, And in that context, with nuclear security, I have heard exactly all of those myths. So just wanted to concur to all that. So thank you.
Go ahead. Go. Yeah. Of course.
The ones from online.
So thank you very much for your question. The inherent secrecy of nuclear programs, I don't think that this is anything that we'll be able to effectively work against, but I think we can kind of work around it. And I think nuclear security is actually a really good pathway or entry point in order for us to work on these issues of transparency. But this also really depends on the countries that are implementing nuclear security and their approach to doing so. So actually the securitization of nuclear security, this is something that we're seeing more and more. And this can be either a good thing or a bad thing. It can be a good thing because when countries undertake securitization of a specific policy or agenda item, this can actually mean that they're doing it and they will be they're taking it out of the normal policy realm and they'll be allocating what they view as the needed resources and capacities to address a very urgent issues. So I think in that instance, there's something that we see in my region, in the Middle East, that can be a positive step. But at the same time, I think in order to kind of break down a lot of these barriers around the nuclear world is to continue, and these are efforts that are kind of already underway, is linking nuclear security to other issues. For example, like the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, and I know that, for example, the VCDNP has a project or sort of ongoing research looking at the intersection of nuclear security and development and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So I think that continuing to build on these efforts and trying to take nuclear security out of this like very hard security framing can actually go a really long way. You know, Ambassador Jenkins mentioned in her opening remarks about nuclear security and about new nuclear builds. So, you know, when we tie nuclear security, that this is something that can help combat climate change, because through the development of nuclear power programs, in order to have those, you need to have nuclear security, which can then address the climate change. We're talking a lot about, we will be discussing, I think, a lot more DEI initiatives in the nuclear space, and I think that, you know, when we talk about the diversity of views and the diversity and inclusion of the different people that should be part of the nuclear security discourse, these are all things that I think soften our perceptions of nuclear security a bit. Thank you so much for your comment about 1540. For me, it all started with 1540 as well. So I definitely see so many of the parallels with that, and it is, like I mentioned in my introduction, this is coming from a regional perspective. You as a regional coordinator are seeing it, so I think we need to continue to amplify these perspectives to make sure that they don't substantially impact what it is that we're working on in a negative way. Thank you.
Thank you for the answers, Jasmine. Thank you for the questions, for those of you who posed them. I'm going to turn to online. We have a couple of questions that came in from our virtual participants, and I'm going to read them out. And then while I'm doing that, and I'm looking at all of you, start thinking about what you'll ask next, because I'm going to come back to you. And if you don't, I'm going to ask a question. So that's your challenge. So our online participants had two questions. One, which they would like your perspective on, but also perhaps some of the perspectives of the later participants and our speakers, which is what kind of background and education is needed to contribute to nuclear security, and what might be some opportunities for, it says young women, but let's expand that, for young people in nuclear security. So that's one. And a second one is, if the world starts moving towards fusion reactors, then would that impact this discussion?
I will decline to answer the second question. To some of the more maybe capable members of the meeting, or some of my fellow panelists. But on the background and educational requirements, I think again this goes to our earlier discussion about the perceptions of nuclear security. Nuclear security is a very technical field, but I think it also has the perception of putting itself forward as a technical inaccessible field. And I think I heard someone at a previous meeting say that, nuclear security needs a new PR guy or, PR girl. Because I really think that we need to continue to work more on presenting nuclear security as having linkages to all these, to the humanitarian aspect of it when we talk about safety, to the environmental aspect, to the social aspect, where we'll be talking about DEI and gender issues. So I personally don't come from a technical background. I stumbled into the nuclear security field somehow. I found myself here and I like it, so I'm staying. I come from a social science background. But a lot of this really comes down to when we talk about sort of the required educational initiatives and systems and frameworks that need to be placed in countries. So actually what we see a lot in the Middle East is that on the sort of educational university level, there are very, very few programs that specifically address nuclear security. And I mean, I think it makes sense. I think we also can't be investing so many resources into these types of initiatives if there isn't enough of a critical mass, first of all. And if we can't also guarantee that these programs will be feeders into eventual nuclear programs or the current nuclear infrastructure of a country. So what a lot of countries have done, for example, is countries that do have existing nuclear engineering programs, for example, maybe you can throw in a module on nuclear security. So a lot of it is really kind of creating interest by proxy. We also see it in a lot of the social sciences, programs on global politics, security studies more broadly. And this is how I got introduced to nuclear security. It was like, a one-liner somewhere. So I personally don't think that there is a specific requirement when it comes to the needed backgrounds, but I'd be happy to hear other views on that issue as well.
Well, I will just add to what you said, which is I have known colleagues, I've been working in nuclear security now for nearly 20 years, and I've had colleagues who came from every background you can imagine almost. So people who started out in social sciences, some people who started out writing, other people who were nuclear engineers, others who were scientists. Just a lot of people and a lot of different ways that you can go about this. But let's turn back to the room. I do have some more questions from online, but does anyone have a question they would like to ask in this session? We have another, I would say, 10 minutes left, so we're not quite at the last call. Okay, please.
Hi, I'm Nicola Miotto. I work at the OSCE as well, dealing with non-proliferation weapons of mass destruction. Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to ask you, as someone, let's use this term, global south, who went to Europe to study in Europe, do you feel that our educational programs in university still allow you to maintain this different perspective from the global south, or do you feel that the programs are built in a way that kind of absorb you in the system and you get maybe more closer with your views to the Western type of knowledge?
Any more questions? Because I'll give you one from online. Okay. I'll give you one more question from online. And that would be, how to encourage states to pursue nuclear security as a collective good rather than merely as a national objective or defense mechanism. Not my words. Interesting words.
Okay, so thank you for your question. And I think this is actually something that I contend with a lot, also having attained a Western education, and I think it's actually taken me a really long time to sort of find my regional voice, so to speak. But I'm also seeing, I think, a lot of. I don't think that what you're saying is a concern. I can't speak to sort of like university, to European universities or educational establishments, kind of in general, but I think there is a growing trend about when it comes to the need to amplify voices other than the dominant ones that we've been hearing. I recently participated in an event, and it was to disseminate a publication that was specifically on global South perspectives to the arms control regime. And that was like such a great thing to participate in, but it's new, but I think there is a growing recognition about the fact that we need to amplify these voices. So I mentioned it in the context of nuclear security, that, you know, people say, you know, like I said, that nuclear security is a Western obsession. Look, it really is easy to write something like that off. You know, if you know the history and about nuclear security and how it evolved and why it's here and why we need it. But when we dismiss these perspectives, I think it can really substantially negatively impact the objective that it is that you're working on. So I don't think it's a given that being in a sort of Western institution or sort of Western modes of thinking will automatically dismiss these types of viewpoints. In fact, I think it's the opposite, because we're becoming more and more aware of the need to include these different perspectives. In terms of encouraging states to pursue nuclear security as a collective good, I mean, I think this is effectively one of the main objectives that the nuclear security regime and the nuclear security community are trying to promote. But it's yes, it is the responsibility of the state. It's about protecting your own material and facilities. But there's also, you know, the narrative about you don't want to be the weakest link in the chain. Maybe that narrative is like tinged with a little bit of shame, but I think in general, this is something that the nuclear security community is doing a pretty good job at positioning nuclear security in such a way. And this also goes back to the point that I mentioned, that about the hard security framing, about an overemphasis perhaps on nuclear terrorism. All these make it very easy for us to consider nuclear security as this thing that's like very secretive thing, this hard security issue. And also, I think another approach towards sort of enhancing this messaging about nuclear security as a collective good, a lot of it comes down to the regional cooperation sort of initiatives when it comes to nuclear security. The fact that it is a transnational threat, the fact that it will impact everyone equally. I think all of these help get that message across about it being a collective good.
So I think that was a great place actually to pause, because we're going to need to, taking a look at the ticking clock, it's about time to move on to our next speakers. And I'm going to give a quick introduction. If you do have questions in your head, do not lose them. Please write them down, because we can come back to these topics, particularly towards the end of the conversation, as I think it's going to loop us back here after we've heard from our last speaker. I also have some from the internet, some virtual questions, and I have the same message. We'll come back to those, we promise. So now that we've set the scene, let's move on to the next topic, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion in nuclear security. I'm gesturing at Viviana Moreno from the World Institute of Nuclear Security, because she's going to start us off there. However, we also will be bringing in Jack Brosnan from the Nuclear Threat Initiative virtually. So I am going to introduce Viviana and Jack both. And that way, what we're going to do is first she's going to speak, then we're going to signal to Jack that he's on, he will speak. And so we don't want to have a pause between. If you have any questions for Viviana, write those down too, along with the ones you're saving for later, because we'll get back to those after Jack's briefing. So let me tell you a little bit about both of them, and then we'll get started. Viviana Espinosa Moreno, and I'm sorry for my pronunciation, serves as a project manager at the World Institute of Nuclear Security, where she leads initiatives focused on integrating new technologies and fostering capacity development in nuclear security across various regions. She is also the gender policy officer, playing a crucial role in the implementation of the organization's gender program, and her experience includes developing comprehensive strategies to design inclusive programs and projects, as well as advising on workplace policies that support gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And she has a bachelor's degree in social and cultural anthropology, going back to the earlier point about people pick this up from lots of places, and a master's degree in international development from the University of Vienna. Jack serves as the program officer for NTI's Nuclear Materials Security Program, where he leads efforts to advance gender equity in the nuclear policy community through Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy, as well as supporting assessment and tracking of nuclear security conditions through the Nuclear the NTI Nuclear Security Index. Jack holds an MA in International Affairs with a concentration in International Security from American University and a BA in Political Science and International Relations from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Now, I'm going to turn to Viviana. Then after that, when you're done, I will then turn to Jack, and then we'll get started again. Please.
Perfect, thank you so much. Please, no questions about nuclear fusion because I also don't have idea. I wear you. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very, very, very pleased, very happy to be here talking about this topic that's really my passion. Thank you, Elena, thank you, Sarah. I'm so happy also to share again the panel with Jasmine. We have done this before, so very excited. So basically, I would like to share two main points today. I've been asked about talking about how gender equality, diversity, and inclusion is an enabler to bring the next generation or the now generation into nuclear security. And I would like to have a conversation on two main points. One is how nuclear security intersects with gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And the second one will be the engagement of a diverse workforce from the perspective of intersectionality. So I would like to begin with the context in which we are right now. And is, as we know, the sector is facing different challenges. We have aging nuclear reactors, we have aging workforce, we are facing the challenge of knowledge transfer. We are also facing the challenge of new technologies. AI is everywhere. And this also connects with emerging threats. And now we are also seeing how many countries are embarking into nuclear energy as a part of the energy mix and the energy transition. And all of this situation right now is that we need a diverse and skilled workforce to meet those challenges coming, not in the future, but happening right now. And it's not just about having enough people and bringing enough people to the sector, but it's bringing the right people and a diverse professionals to the sector. So we need to build a workforce that is resilient, that is creative, that capable of mitigating those risks associated with nuclear and radioactive materials. So what's the role that gender equality, diversity, and inclusion play here? And is that we often see, as Sarah mentioned and Jasmine mentioned, DEI as a marginalized topic within the nuclear security discussion. And we have it like sometimes, very kind of in the end of the agenda about workforce development, and not. Nuclear is about people. And DEI is a fundamental principle for nuclear security and for a robust security. And it's a very useful category of analysis too. So I am going to give you 3 examples to convince you that it's a very important principle, a fundamental principle. One is that research indicates that diverse teams, as we was mentioned, lead to increase of productivity. It facilitates the generation of innovative solutions, fosters better decision-making processes, and I wanted also to give you an example. It is coming from a region and from a country like Colombia, where we face different threat actors during many years. And we face also other challenges with infrastructure and geographical challenges. We have been dealing with all of these threats for many years. So we have, at the moment, the workforce capable of having a different perception of risk. So having people also, as you mentioned, Jasmine, we were having the challenge to make nuclear security as a global concept, right? And we need to raise awareness about that different risk perceptions in different regions will help us to enhance the nuclear security understanding. The other concept that I would like to mention is the conceptualization of threats, and this is something that we usually see in the sector, and is also often framed around the concept of what constitutes a threat, which is frequently a person. So therefore, the sector needs to acknowledge that there is potential impact of bias and preconceptions in threat assessment, for example. And the failure to do so may result in an unjust treatment or errors in crucial security decisions. So, for example, a study that looked at how managers view employees who might misuse computer systems, focusing on whether they treat male and female employees different. So basically, this study found that managers perceive misconduct of male different from female employees. So the study found that managers see how male employees' misconduct was more severe compared to female employees. So this basically, when managers tend to evaluate security issues involving their employees, they wear biases towards male and women. Another critical example that I would like to mention, and it was in part of my introduction, is the emergence of AI and how this introduced also bias and discrimination, and the data that we are training our algorithms, it's already biased, and it's not clean data. So, for example, there was this report from DW, and they revealed how this AI system algorithm managed to correctly identify an infrared thermometer held by the right hand, and then when the gun, when the infrared thermometer was held by a black hand, it was taken as it was a gun. So it was very shocking to see how these algorithms are trained with the data that has already been poisoned by bias and discrimination, and also to see how in the future, or how now we are using this for surveillance, predictive policing, and for threat assessment, for example. So what I wanted to bring into consideration is that here, gender equality, diversity, and inclusion is not just an HR issue, as I said, but it's a core nuclear security principle, and we need to take into consideration all of these concepts to really design our sector in a more inclusive way. As I mentioned, the second part of my remarks, I would like to emphasize the need for a foundational dialogue on intersectionality within the nuclear sector, and it's based on research and also personal experience that I would like to acknowledge this. And I wanted to pose the question to you, maybe you can reflect on it, and it's that it's the nuclear sector really attracting and retaining diverse professionals? And is the sector prepared to have an inclusive culture and to retain these professionals through an inviting culture? So I would like you to think about that, and maybe in the questions and in the comments, then you can share your thoughts. Because we need to acknowledge now that we are competing with other sectors, like the tech sector, for example. It's so much attractive to young professionals at the moment than the nuclear sector. As you mentioned, Jasmine, the nuclear security sector, everyone may see it as very far. People from my region see nuclear security not as a priority because we have to meet other needs first before embarking into a career, for example, in nuclear security. No one thinks about, okay, I wake up and then I need to pursue a career in nuclear security. It's very limited to people from the global north, I have to say. So one of the things that we have identified is that there is not enough awareness of nuclear security as a career, as a possibility. We also have identified that there is a lack of information, and this also is related with barriers in language. So there is limited awareness of the concept of nuclear security. They also don't see this as a priority, as I said. So what Jasmine mentioned regarding connecting nuclear security with peaceful uses and with nuclear application is something that day-to-day people use in their lives, you know, going to have a check that use a particular device that use a source, for example. You know, in this way you connect people, you know, with the concept, and you raise awareness. The other structural problem that people from my region are facing and young professionals are facing is the access to education. It is not given that you can access to higher education in my region and in other regions. There is also not a career part, as we mentioned. There is also this fear to get into something that maybe is too technical, too complicated, that is not going to put food in my table, because I'm not going to have the means to pursue a career and also to meet my needs and the needs of my family. So and this is usually exacerbated when you come from a vulnerable groups, from being in indigenous communities, Afro communities, or when you are displaced by the conflict in a particular region. This connects with also having a very small sector in such countries, because we cannot see, for example, in the US there is a big sector, the UK, Europe, but these professionals that finish, for example, a career, I don't know, in nuclear energy, they don't have the possibility to find easily a job within their countries. So most of them, they have to fly, they have to go to another country and develop their careers there. So all of these are structural challenges and connected with other forms of barriers like gender disparity, gender pay gap, a toxic work culture. So it's probably a combination of all of these challenges are barriers that are kind of slowing down the engagement of the young generation and a diverse next generation of professionals. So with that, I close my remarks, and I look forward for discussion and conversation and your thoughts. Thank you so much.
But before we get to that discussion and conversation, hold your thoughts. I have a lot of questions. I'm sure everyone does. But let's go to Jack in Washington, D.C. this morning. Are you ready, Jack?
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everybody, from a very cloudy and rainy Washington this morning, unfortunately, although I hear it's quite nice in Vienna today. I could probably end my remarks here by saying I agree with what everyone who's spoken before me has said today. There have been some really great comments, and in particular, I'm really pleased to hear the focus on retention of the current workforce that exists today. There has been historically a lot of discussion of cultivating interest and developing, youth interest in nuclear security, broadening recruitment. I think structurally one of the challenges that we will always face is that compared to other professional sectors, the field of nuclear security will never be that large, even as the Global demand for nuclear energy rises. Countries deploy new nuclear reactors for the first time. Organizations and governments need to seek out new talent. The expansion of that space will still never eclipse much larger professional sectors. So there is sort of a permanent structural constraint there. And to my mind, that tells me that we need to focus very closely on the need to retain the progress that we've made thus far. And in that context, I think that looking toward icons next month, shaping the future of nuclear security is not just a really apt theme, but it should really be seen as a call to action to the current generation of nuclear security professionals, or as Elena said, generation now. These are the people who will remain in the workforce long enough to be responsible for the future that we're shaping, that we're tasked with shaping, and that we're looking toward. Thinking about that, there are many ways of envisioning what the future of nuclear security might look like. That includes new technologies, evolution in threats and risks, and also new ways for governments to cooperate, which is even more important. But ultimately, it's impossible to discuss the future of nuclear security without considering the human dimensions of what that future looks like, who it includes, how it includes them, and why. In this context, skeptics will often argue that diversity, equity, and inclusion measures are kind of a distraction from core nuclear security considerations. I think Viviana has done an incredible job of outlining why that's not true. And in fact, diversity, equity, and inclusion are very much at the heart of implementation of nuclear security. But beyond organizations, nuclear security is a shared responsibility that requires continuous attention and ongoing effort. Including diversity in nuclear security means an acknowledgement of the fact that all countries have a role to play. Nuclear energy is expanding, but even absent that, it's a complex international system that requires input from every government in the world to close gaps in the global nuclear security architecture, to implement legal instruments, to protect against the illicit transshipment of nuclear materials, and ultimately to protect humanity from the illicit use of nuclear materials. This is an incredibly important mission, and it requires inclusive international cooperation. So in this sense, there are multiple dimensions to what diversity in nuclear security means. Thinking about the details of implementing the future of nuclear security, it's also going to require a diverse range of professional disciplines, as Ambassador Jenkins alluded to in her remarks. We see rising consideration of cybersecurity risks, complex hybrid domain threats to nuclear facilities, deeper consideration of what insider threat looks like, including in the hybrid domain, but also in the context of what organizational culture and workplaces actually look like. And this is particularly proximate as I'm from the United States. And here in 2017, we had a very, very noteworthy incident at the US Department of Energy Nevada National Security Site, where a woman working on the site protection force was sexually assaulted by her colleagues during a force-on-force exercise. So you can see the way in which a toxic work culture, as Viviana described, or the failure to build an inclusive work culture within an organization can jeopardize the retention of a diverse workforce and can also jeopardize the effective implementation of nuclear security measures. As we think about shaping the future, the best way to move forward, from my perspective, is a concerted effort to weave diversity, equity, and inclusion into all aspects of nuclear security conversation. This includes the technical discussion of physical protection measures, as well as considerations of international cooperation, human resources concerns, workforce planning for the future, and all aspects of who, how, and why people are involved in nuclear security. So these are all very nice things to say. But beyond that, the big question is, how do we go about using this information or this line of thought to actually shape the future? And I think we do have some lessons learned from progress that we've seen over the past decade or so in broader nuclear security trends. Of particular importance, from my perspective, is the need to see public commitments to diversity from people in positions of leadership. For example, the commitment of IAEA Director General Grossi had incredible power, not just in shaping the agency itself and its workforce, but also in driving conversation about why the IAEA would be concerned about gender parity and what it means to create and retain and maintain a more diverse workforce. Programs that the IAEA has implemented, like the Lise Meitner Fellowship and the Marie Curie Fellowship, are important instruments for driving interest among youth, yes, in nuclear security, but also in creating opportunity. And I think, as Viviana pointed out, access to opportunity is one of the greatest structural barriers to bringing diversity to nuclear security. But the point that I would make here is that there is unique power in the messaging about doing these things coming from these very visible positions of leadership, because it creates new openings to bring the importance of this topic into new conversations from this position of authority, and it brings more eyes to the issue. The broader these discussions can be, then the deeper they can be, and the more pieces of the nuclear security conversation they'll touch. And that results in a much richer engagement in the need to shape the future in this context. So ultimately, one way forward is that more leaders should make public commitments of this kind. So, for example, a self-serving comment. At NTI, we host Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy, and I'm quite pleased to be joined on this panel today by other gender champions. Ali is a gender champion representing the Odessa Center for Non-Proliferation. Of course, Elena represents VCDNP, and in her past role in civil society, Ambassador Jenkins was a gender champion representing women of color advancing peace, security, and conflict transformation. Where leaders make these kinds of commitments publicly, they're able to use their platform and their role as a public ambassador for the spaces that they work in, the issues that they work on, to bring this discourse into new places and to enrich the conversation in unique ways. This is something that it's a little bit contingent on leaders to take the step forward and actually make the public commitment. But as we think about the people who are in the nuclear security workforce today, there's a unique opportunity to engage with the leaders who you work with in your organizations or who you work with broadly across the community to bring their attention to this issue. You know, we've worked with a number of leaders who have told us, formally or informally, I didn't know that this was so important until the mid-level and early career people in my organization brought it to my attention and showed me these opportunities to shape the future of my organization in this way. It can be incredibly challenging work, but a lot of the work that happens in shaping an organization happens at the mid-level, and that's generation now. In aggregate, as organizations themselves change, the nuclear security field and the world around us also continues to change. It involves using multiple points of leverage. And I will restate again that I think those highly visible commitments from leaders are very important, but it's really the people who support those leaders who do the hard work to make these things possible. You see a similar paradigm with the international gender champions who do quite similar work across the breadth of the UN system, working on a range of issues. And we've also seen other leaders, for example, DG Grossi, step forward to make their own individualized commitments. It's incredibly powerful and impactful piece of leverage, and really bringing more eyes to this conversation has no downsides. Beyond that, there is also a growing body of best practice literature that draws together the importance of addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion and core elements of nuclear security. And this comes from both IAEA best practice guidance on nuclear security, as well as some of the pioneering work that Viviana and her colleagues have done at WINS. And there are crucial opportunities there for nuclear security organizations concerned about improving their effectiveness, in strengthening nuclear security implementation, and making their organizations more flexible, more durable, more effective, and able to retain talented people. There are opportunities there to implement real road-tested policies, clear approaches that can change the way an organization works. And the tools are already available. Ultimately, I think that youth interest in nuclear issues, this has been a very hot topic of conversation for some years now, but it seems to be quite strong. You know, the IAEA and other organizations have seen a lot of interest generated in their programming for youth, in opportunities created for youth. But coming back to the point that I made at the beginning of my remarks here, we need to work very hard to retain the talent that we have. The established paradigm that we face today is one of a leaky pipeline, where that youth interest is drawn into this, again, fairly small field of nuclear security and runs directly into the structural obstacle of limited opportunities, challenges to access, and in many cases, an unwelcoming and non-inclusive organizational culture on the other side of many of the available opportunities. organizations need to prioritize addressing these challenges to be able to bring diversity into their work. Otherwise, we face false limitations in addressing the challenges, risks, and threats of nuclear security tomorrow. The ultimate forcing need to expand the nuclear security workforce as driven by growing demand for nuclear energy, and the need to bring the richest, best level of thought possible to addressing some truly complex problems. Beyond that, thinking about bringing inclusivity to nuclear security is key to addressing some of what Jasmine addressed, the paradigms of global north versus global south in nuclear security. In our nuclear security index released in July of this year, we actually found that it was countries in the global south right now who are driving progress on nuclear security, while countries in the global north with weapons usable nuclear material are the ones who have been somewhat complacent over the last 3 or so years. That directly undermines this sort of established myth or paradigm that global nuclear security is only the province of countries in the global north. And I think as we're able to explore in some detail what an inclusive nuclear security narrative means and what it can change for international cooperation on nuclear security, this is a really important dimension that often gets lost in the mix in conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think several people on this panel have addressed the fact that these conversations often get cast very narrowly as an HR issue or a very limited consideration. But it really undermines the strength of what diversity, equity, and inclusion can do for nuclear security. So finally, recognizing that we have quite limited time today, and I've probably gone on for too long, I will close on this point. Diversity, equity, and inclusion for organizations should be a core part of a strategic planning process. It should not be an afterthought. It should not be an effort to check a box. There are many ways of doing this, but this involves very core organizational and business processes like gathering and using benchmarking and performance data, conducting needs assessments or other structured analyses to identify opportunities for strengthening the organization's implementation and operations, or even a monitoring and evaluation-based cycle of continuous improvement to analyze the outputs of an organization and where they can be strengthened. These things all exist in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's a lack of creative thought and richness of discussion that holds us back from addressing them in that fashion. So I will stop there. I have said plenty. Thank you for the time, and I will turn back to you now, Sarah.
Okay, everyone. So Jack, thank you very much. Viviana, thank you. That was a lot. It was a lot of good information for everybody. And I know you probably have thousands of questions, I assume, for Jack and Viviana. Unfortunately, we're running a bit tight on time, and I think it's really important that we hear from our last speaker and have some time for discussion after about everything that's been wrapped up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 to 2 questions from the room, and then I have 2 from online. We're going to then turn to Jack for his comments, then to Viviana to respond to them all at once. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn afterwards to our last speaker. So save questions that cover everything for them. Do we have any questions from the room specifically for? Oh, there's 2 already. You guys are the fastest. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? It works, okay. Yeah. So my name is Victoria Granikova, and I'm from Slovakia, and I know about this opportunity from the Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, to which I participate. And I was wondering about what Viviana mentioned about the data that is already biased and has some discrimination in it, and also a lack of opportunities and of equality in general. And I was wondering, what do you think about positive discrimination and positive action to maybe change this inequality that is already in there, and whether you also think that it could be considered as having some counter effect to the equality of opportunity also for others. And I was also wondering that sometimes when it is considered from this HR perspective that, for example, we need to have more women, they are there, but they are usually not on the leading positions. So whether you think that this can be, whether there can be something done about this as well. Thank you.
Second question.
Good afternoon. My name is Lara. I am an intern at CIPRI, and I'm also a mentee of the Young Women in Non-Proliferation, organized by the VCDNP. And I'm from Brazil, so I really appreciate everything that Viviana said, specifically about the structure challenges that we face, because I think I am a living proof of everything that you said. I migrated to Europe 6 years ago, trying to find an opportunity in this field as well. So I really, really appreciate everything that you said for bringing this up. And I want to ask you, what do you think that maybe our generation, the now generation, could do to mitigate these structural challenges? If there's anything that we can do to change this, what is that?
Then, just as a warning, I'm going to add some questions from online before we turn. We do have one more from the room. So we will gather them all up and give them each 2 minutes to respond to all of your comments. Please, quickly, because we don't want to miss out on the end.
Thank you very much. My name is Esther. I'm from the IEA. I come from Ghana, actually. I'm really happy with what Jack and Viviana said. Coming from my background, I will come from my background. We focus more on nuclear safety. And so nuclear security is not like a major focus. So how would you advise somebody with a similar background to contribute to nuclear safety, meanwhile they have a major focus that their country is looking at? I don't know whether my question is clear.
No, I think it's quite clear. I think it was a great question, so I'm glad that you raised it, actually. No, but I'm going to read one question from online. A comment from the participant online has said, they feel that the nuclear industry isn't very welcoming, and today's event is the first talk on this subject that they are attending. How can we encourage more open dialogue and reach more sectors of society? And the second question is, noting the lack of awareness in developing countries could be a problem throughout these discussions. What about developed and well-equipped and highly educated countries? Is lack of awareness also a problem there? So first, we're going to turn to Jack and let him give some insights on these 5 questions. Jack, you have 3 minutes. It's going to be great.
All right, I will do my best to remember all of the 5 questions. So apologies if I miss any details here. In the first place, one thing that I would highlight in the advancement of women into these positions of seniority, this is a major challenge. When there's a strong pipeline of diverse talent coming into a field, that largely fills junior positions. And that there's, of course, obstacles there. These more senior positions require specific experience, in some cases technical. There are some really fascinating programs run by, for example, some of the Women in Nuclear chapters that operate mentorship programs or executive accelerator programs that are close to industry, that are designed to help women in particular cultivate the skills and experience needed to fill those roles in the future. So this is very much a generation now problem to me, because a lot of the people who will stay in the nuclear security workforce and also in the nuclear energy workforce are the people who will be best equipped to fill those roles in the future. So stick around, seek out mentorship, be a mentor, work with peers. I talked a lot about the need to see public commitment from leaders. That's a complementary effort. So much of what makes for an inclusive and positive culture in organizations is peer work. Being a good colleague, thinking about guidance related to security and safety culture and insider threat. A lot of that comes down to being a good colleague, a good employee, a good peer. And those are very important functions to play, because we also help cultivate each other for these positions of leadership and seniority in the future. I will use that to segue into the question about contributing to positive nuclear security while working on nuclear safety. There's a strong nexus between nuclear safety and nuclear security, a lot of which comes down to safety and security culture. In many ways, by doing a good job in an organization working on nuclear safety, you are contributing to nuclear security through positive safety culture. Being a woman, frankly, in these spaces may be challenging, but by being a positive presence, contributing to the mission of your organization and supporting your peers, you play a really important role in driving that mission forward as an individual. And I'm probably running short on time, and I'm also running short on memory for additional questions here. I suppose I will. Oh, sorry, the question about awareness. Awareness is absolutely a challenge in quote unquote more developed countries. There are, frankly, in the United States, one of the things that we face is political backlash to questions of increasing diversity in particular spaces, in education, in the workforce. This conversation needs work everywhere. And to my mind, one of the biggest challenges is harmonizing the discussion across regions of the world. I'm sure Viviana has some thoughts on this as well, but typically the international discourse focuses on diversity of gender because it's common across countries. There are elements of intersectionality, elements of regional identity, ethnic group, religion that are very, very important here that are different across every country. It's important to mean that it's important to recognize that diversity means different things in every local, regional, national context, as well as across different industries. And finding ways to weave together those threads of different types of diversity is as important as any other part of this conversation. I have already talked far too long, so I will stop here and let you hear some much better comments from Viviana.
Well, those were many questions, but I will try. I will start with the AI questions and about bias and discrimination. I think that we have to, of course, have diverse teams working from the design to the training and implementation of AI technologies into nuclear security. We need to have human oversight. We cannot just let these technologies run by themselves. So that's why we need also the workforce capable of understanding that these are risks, that the bias and the discriminations are risks that we will deal in the present and in the future with AI technologies. Another thing that you mentioned was regarding that we were able to attract a lot of women, but usually they are underrepresented in senior and managing levels positions, and I agree. It's true, and organizations lie about their data, and when they show the data, they show how job segregation works, and then you see like, okay, they are doing great because they have, 67% of women, but it's not true because they are in admin positions and they are not getting into the senior and managing levels. I think it's very important to offer mentoring opportunities for women to get into managing and leadership roles, because it's actually something that we have been told that we are not good enough, and here is a proof that is, it's a woman in a managing position. So it's having role models, hard mentoring, and all of this. It's very, very useful. Your questions regarding what can we done for this, facing all of these structural challenges that we have in our countries. Unfortunately, this is part of a broader conversation, and it's the conversation about inequality and social inclusion. But I think that in this type of conversations and give us visibility. So the fact that you are here, I'm here talking about this and what we face, it will change the mindset of people, and then this will impact in organization policies and procedures. And I am also the living example of it in my organization. And when I'm invited to share my perspective and my experience as a woman in the sector, as a woman from the Global South, I think, again, speaking up, it's being our own activists is something that is very, very important. I'm missing a question, and it was a difficult one. So I totally agree with you. There is more awareness now for the safety part and the security part, especially from governments. It's usually difficult to raise awareness about nuclear security and publicly speak about nuclear security.
of course, it's more focused on safety, but Jasmine also mentioned that we need to focus on those links between nuclear security, peaceful uses applications. And I think this is a great way to communicate with the public and with the young generations about this important topic. So I believe, yes, nuclear security need to hire a lot of PR people to make a better job in social media and to talk with the public and attract more diverse professionals that may be interested in the sector.
Thank you, Viviana. Thank you, Jack, also for your answers to the questions. We are running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to go ahead now and very shortly turn to Ali Alkis. Ali is joining us online from Ankara, where he is a PhD candidate at, and I apologize, I'll try, Hacettepe University. His research focuses on nuclear security during armed conflict and national nuclear security regimes for newcomer states. His research interests encompass nuclear security, non-proliferation, and nuclear terrorism, as well as Turkish nuclear and foreign policies. So with that, over to you, Ali, for our very last briefing today.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone, from a sunny and really warm Ankara afternoon. It is great to be here. I don't know what to add more after such great panelists before me, but I think I can start thanking the VCDNP, especially Elena and Sarah, for inviting me to share my perspective on such an important topic. Today, I will share my thoughts about nuclear security through the lens of next generation of nuclear professionals, meaning my generation. Imagine a world where the threat of nuclear terrorism is minimized, where the nuclear materials and facilities are protected with utmost care, where nuclear piracy poses no risks, and where international cooperation among many stakeholders ensures a more secure future for all. That's the vision we aim to realize, and it starts with us, the young minds of passionate about shaping the course of nuclear security. So how can we, the next generation, steer the direction of nuclear security in the coming decades? Before going into details of it, I would like to challenge a notion deeply rooted in our collective consciousness, the concept of next generation. It has been already addressed by Ambassador Jenkins and Elena Sokova, but let me share the perspective of someone who is called next generation. It is a term often used to refer to those who will inherit the future, those who are yet to come, and those who will shape the world we live in tomorrow. But what if I told you that this term, as innocent as it may sound, subtly diminishes the impact of very individuals like me it seeks to empower? I propose reevaluating how we perceive and approach the notion of next generation. By labeling ourselves as a part of next generation, we inadvertently relegate ourselves to a distant future. This creates a false dichotomy between the present and the future, implying that our role in shaping the world is somehow postponed. But let me ask you this. Are we not already shaping the world we live in today? Are we not actively contributing to nuclear security discussions? The answer to me is resounding yes. We are not just passive bystanders waiting for our turn to take the stage. We are actors, the architects, and the change makers of the present. I believe it is time to shift our mindset and embrace the new paradigm, our current roles and responsibilities. We are not just next generation professionals in nuclear policies. We are integral members of the here and now. Our actions, decisions, and innovations have the power to catalyze transformative change in the present and the future of nuclear security. Furthermore, while the nuclear renaissance may not unfold as predicted, SMRs might open a new period. Picture this, a world where nuclear power is not confined to a few, but accessible to countries eager to harness nuclear technology's potential. SMRs might reshape the energy landscape, sparking innovation in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. As the number of nuclear facilities increases, there will be a greater need for younger professionals. In addition, let's not forget about the retiring workforce in the UK, in France, Japan, and India. All these factors point to a near future where our expertise and dedication will be increasingly required. With this, if you are a younger nuclear security professional or want to be one, I would like you to consider what role you envision yourself playing in shaping the future of nuclear security. Are you a scientist developing cutting-edge technologies to enhance nuclear security? Are you a policymaker crafting diplomatic solutions to existing nuclear security threats? Or perhaps you are a security guard at a nuclear facility, ensuring the protection of these vital installations. Whatever role you may choose, it comes with a heavy responsibility. This responsibility requires us to engage and be dynamic in our responses to existing and evolving nuclear risks. First and foremost, education and training are our foundation for contributing to a more secure world. We must equip ourselves with the knowledge and skills needed to tackle the complex challenges of nuclear security. Whether it is studying nuclear engineering, international relations, cybersecurity, or any other relevant field, we need to understand the interdisciplinary learning to become well-rounded experts ready to face any threat head-on. But education alone is not enough. We must also foster a culture of innovation. Imagine the possibilities. Robotic systems patrolling nuclear facilities, AI algorithms analyzing data for potential security breaches, and advanced sensors detecting even the slightest anomalies. It is our duty to push the boundaries of technological innovation and harness its power to protect our world, including nuclear materials and facilities. It is also our duty to prevent malicious actors, where possible or otherwise manage their attempts to misuse these innovations as well. However, we cannot do this alone. Nuclear security is a global issue that transcends borders. By forging partnerships with experts from diverse backgrounds and engaging in international cooperation, we can strengthen our impact and create a resilient front against nuclear threats. Moreover, we must recognize the regional differences in nuclear security. Each region faces its own set of challenges and circumstances. By addressing these specific regional concerns and collaborating with the neighboring countries, we can bolster our collective resilience against possible threats. Regional cooperation complements global efforts, ensuring a comprehensive approach to safeguarding against nuclear proliferation and enhancing overall security. And finally, we should remember the power of public outreach and education. Nuclear security can seem daunting and inaccessible to many, but it doesn't have to be. By demystifying nuclear security through the engaging outreach programs, educational initiatives, and webinars like this one, we can empower the public to become informed about the potential risks and responses to those, thereby achieving a more secure world. In addition, we must acknowledge the wealth of talent and passion already present within the next generation or younger generation of nuclear security professionals. For example, the upcoming Icons in May introduced the Delegation for the Future. This initiative has garnered significant interest, with approximately 250 applications submitted, according to the IAEA. However, due to the limited number of spots available, only 10 successful candidates out of 42 shortlisted young professionals were chosen to participate. Unfortunately, 10 is very few, and likely the 32 who were not shortlisted but not selected were still great candidates, and that more opportunities are needed. This is why, as a voice of countless young individuals who are ready to dedicate their careers to nuclear security, I can clearly say that we need more opportunities like this one to share our insights and shape the discourse on nuclear security. To conclude, I firmly believe that the future of nuclear security rests in our hands. We should rise to the challenge armed with knowledge, innovation, collaboration, and strong leadership, and a commitment to the public engagement. Together, we can shape a future where we can all rest assured that our collective security is steadfastly preserved. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sarah.
So thank you so much, Ali. I think this was a great way to start off this very last discussion that we're going to have today. I have already, of course, questions from online. You virtual participants are great. We've got more questions we can address, way more. But before we do that, let me ask for questions that are specifically for Ali. And let's gather up some of those. Give him a chance to answer all of those in a group. And then we'll come back and maybe you can ask some questions for everyone. Do we have any specific questions here? Well, Ali, apparently you just said everything so well that nobody has any questions for you. But I do have one from online, which I will address to you right now. And that is, how can a BA student prepare for a career in international nuclear security? Jobs often require work experience, gaining experience is difficult, and there are scarce opportunities during the undergraduate studies. So would you like to provide her perhaps, or him, I suppose, with some advice?
That's a great question, but it is also the hard one. I know how it is hard to get a nuclear security job after graduation. It takes time, and when we look at the requirements, it is really, sometimes they really ask hard requirements, because if you are just graduated and you cannot expect a young graduate student to have 3 years of professional experience in nuclear industry. So I totally understand the frustration, and I totally understand why the question is being asked, but unfortunately I cannot show a clear way out. All I can say is that there are great opportunities at VCDNP, at IAEA, and at other think tanks and non-governmental organizations as interns. So if you can start with internships, I'm sure the network that you will build will help you get some of the jobs that requires some professional experience. So if you can have some internship experience, it might lead the way. But otherwise, I don't know how we can fix this problem. I think maybe we should talk to HR people in IAEA or in other nuclear security organizations that graduates don't graduate from their universities without professional experience. Maybe they can just be flexible about their requirements for graduate students.
So I believe Elena has some comments that might help as well.
I'm gonna add a little bit to what Ali said about internship. And while they are a good opportunity for many to gain more experience, they are only a partial solution. And speaking from a position where now I'm the one who hires people, although we're a small organization, but I know by comparing notes with other think tanks and others, they are indeed a good opportunity to deepen your knowledge, to network, gain experience, but it does not necessarily lead you to securing a job. And unfortunately, for many international organizations, they don't count internships as job experience. So there are pros and cons of this approach, and we need to be really open about it and some of the difficulties. It is an opportunity, but a limited one, so we need to think beyond that. And the other point that I want to note, and it's still the case in some organizations, including, I'm not gonna be afraid to say it, at the UN, where internships are not paid. Not that we give you a hefty salary when we hire interns, but nonetheless, unpaid internships is a shame nowadays. It limits the diversity. How can a person from a global south afford coming to Vienna or Geneva or New York or any other or European or other developed country capital where most of these opportunities are available, if there is no compensation for that. So I just couldn't keep my mouth shut from making these points. Sorry, Sarah, back to you.
Well, thank you, Elena. It's good points, and I think Viviana actually wants to tag something on there as well.
Just a small thought that I have, and is we are not good at kind of pushing this conversation between or cooperation between universities and industry. So I think universities and industry are not talking to each other, you know, to kind of have a better path, a professional path from just recent graduates going into the industry. So I think maybe there is some kind of work to do between university programs and industry. So I think something like we have to keep in mind.
So, as we've talked about that, do we have now, just to wrap up, so we're getting near the end. We're not at a super hard stop now, but we're almost there. Do we have any last questions that you would like to hear answers to from anyone? There's one, there's two, okay. No?
Sorry.
Yeah. Over here.
No, go to you first, it's fine.
Okay. That's okay.
Thank you. I'm lucky enough to have a boss who is here in the room, actually. And is very good at, you know, she believes a lot in training younger people. But I know also from experience from other friends that it's not often the case. So I want to ask to the panelists, but also to Elena, actually, and Sarah as well, since you're a bit, I don't want to use the term older generation, but you're more experienced than us, right? How do you think people can foster this sort of intergenerational partnership? Like, how do you transform an internship in an opportunity to, you know, educate a person and, you know, pay for him or her the way into your organization, and not just this moments where you can say, yes, there was a young person who came and passed by and then the person left.
Let's take the one other question and then we'll look at some thoughts within the room, and then after that we'll move on to the closing.
Hi, thank you. I had a question that we already touched on kind of a little bit, but I heard a lot of talk, for instance, about the commitments by certain international organizations to diversity, equality and inclusion, and of course also the Marie Curie Fellowship Program that a couple of people here are also part of, I heard. I worked with the IEA when I was with the Dutch Foreign Ministry to try to get people interested in joining this fellowship program. And I found that it was very hard, even when I had contacts with universities, to actually get people to join in on events, also because of a lack of knowledge about nuclear affairs and a lack of interest as well. So my question would be, after these commitments to DEI are made, what are some very tangible steps that organizations like the IEA or foreign ministries can take to make sure that this commitment is translated into practically getting people into these programs? Thank you.
So these are some great questions. I just want to get, the way I'd like to go about doing this though, is because we're running near the end, is for each of the panelists to combine a response to these really great questions, plus any closing remarks they might have. And we'll start, actually, if we could, let's start with the virtual participants and see if they have any responses and any last thoughts, very, very briefly, and then we'll move into the room to wrap up. So let's start with Jack, if we could. Jack, do you have any thoughts on these two questions or any last points you'd like to make before we close out today?
Yeah, I'll condense everything into just a couple of quick thoughts here. You know, I think as we think through these questions and the conversation we've had, the challenges that have been surfaced here, a lot of what we're talking about is existing actors in the space putting their money where their mouth is, if you'll forgive the use of the expression. funding of opportunities. What role can organizations and industry and foreign ministries play? A lot of it is funding for these positions, making sure that there's follow through on the other side. I think a few people, including Elena and Ali, have pointed out the fact that it's very easy to pursue an opportunity and then be left at square one at the other end of that opportunity, trying to find the next thing, whether it be a limited term fellowship or an internship that is maybe not actually that much of a step forward. And so much of what is required to change the status quo about that is to do, for example, some of the work that the IAEA is doing now to try and find placement for fellows in jobs on the other side of these fellowships, which is an incredibly challenging thing to do. But to my mind, what that means is that we need to raise the volume of conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion across all of these actors. So for example, through Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy, we work with government, civil society, and industry. And something that we can and should do better is try and draw those sectors together to identify cross streams of opportunity because, and I think Viviana mentioned this, working with industry is where many of the jobs are. Many of the jobs are in governments, creating opportunities in those places, creating efforts that complement one another, thinking strategically about what we're doing. I think we're all talking in the same direction, but a lot of it does come down to using resources, including time, money, and coordination to wear down the structural obstacles that exist in the space we're looking at as it is today, as we seek to shape the future. So I'll stop there.
So thank you, Jack, for those comments. Let's go to Ali over in Ankara and see if he has any last thoughts, both on those questions, Ali, and anything else you wanted to say before we close out today.
Yes, Jack has already summarized everything. We can say that, but I can add maybe this one. If the nuclear renaissance may unfold as it's expected, there will be more need for human resource. And when we consider the next generation reactors, SMRs, and other new types, I'm sure there will be more need for human resources, and it may be our chance to find jobs in nuclear industry. And I also agree with Viviana that we need to more engage in industry, because I can give an example from Turkish example. When we look at the jobs in nuclear industry in Turkey, government has limited jobs. But when we look at the operator, industry has more opportunities. Maybe we should also consider that we shouldn't always aim for the government. Maybe there are some other ways to think about our careers. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Ali, for those comments as well. And let's go ahead and run through the room, starting from Jasmine and then moving this way for some last comments as well.
Sure, no, I don't really have too much to add at this point. Everybody summed it up so well. I would just echo the remarks that were made about the need for these efforts to really be complementary. We talked a lot about the need to demystify nuclear security and how can we attract new talent, but at the same time we need to make sure that we're not creating demand that we can't meet. And in those instances where we can meet that demand, we need to make sure that we're actually ready to absorb it. Those will just be my concluding remarks.
Yes, I would like to answer the question regarding knowledge transfer and how we talk about between the generations and senior and young professionals. And instead we need to focus also of how senior managers are prepared to be a mentor, to be mentors. So because, you say you will be the perfect intern if you do this and this and this, but what about the senior who is, giving you the opportunity and being your mentor? Are you really receiving what you need? Are the tools that you need for the future? So probably coaching would be a great way that organizations can approach having good mentorships programs. So I think that would be important. And just to close my comments, the last thing that I want to say is that the next generation is not an homogeneous group. is a group made from different genders, different ages, different backgrounds, different regions, economical backgrounds, and ethnic background. So we need to shape the sector to attract and retain this diverse group of people, and and effectively shape the future.
Thank you, Viviana. And I know that Elena had a couple of quick thoughts on some of these questions about being a mentor in the future. And
Given the direct question, some of the comments already somewhat answered the question that you directed at me, is the mentorship. And it doesn't have to be a formal mentorship program. Like the VCDNP has established one within the EU Non-Professional Disarmament Consortium, and I'm pleased to have our former mentee here. But for me, when I started in the field, it was very helpful to have somebody who could advise me on like how to better write a paper or make a presentation, how to choose within the field what to focus on, or in general approach. You have to be comfortable with having somebody like that and having these conversations. It's not always the case that you may have somebody around you to have that, but the field is big enough that you can probably connect with others in the field. I had, for example, an individual who was not part of my organization, and I felt more comfortable to ask that individual for advice. So I think that would be in terms of job creation, I wish, each time we have an intern and all of them are really great and awesome, I wish I could keep them, but there are limits to certain things that we could do. But if there are opportunities we know from others, or there are programs that can benefit, I'm always happy to provide a recommendation and reach out and see it. But for small organizations like ours, we don't have that many opportunities for employment. But I know there are a great number of next generation coming up specialists who are extremely talented, thoughtful, that could bring a lot to the field. But I hope that the conversation we're having today, and I'm really grateful to all your thoughts. I'll give Sarah the last word, but I think this is an important conversation, and I'm sure some of the discussion we had today we can carry forward into other fora, and maybe have a conversation including with the ICONS organizers at the IAA. I know it's probably late to increase this delegation of next generation from 10 to more, but if there are other ways to engage at least those who were shortlisted and selected, I think that would be a good way to at least promote the continuing interest and diversity in the field. But you all are great, and I don't see Jack and Ali, thank you, but Jasmine and Viviana, this is awesome. Sarah, back to you.
Well, I would just want to add one or two very quick thoughts, which is, first of all, I'm glad we're ending on this topic. I think it's actually one of the most important topics. It's not just about what is the next generation going to do, the now generation, but how are you going to get there? And I would add something that, to me, I'm always thinking about, the importance of fostering a culture of mentorship, not just the idea that people come in and then they deliver some product and they move on, but that it's very important for the people in the middle and the people at higher levels to care about guiding the people under them. And that doesn't, as Elena pointed out, necessarily mean guiding them within the organization with such small places, but rather you can emphasize the importance of a community and guiding them within the bigger community, which is the network of all of these organizations that are represented here today, represented online, and so forth. I want to leave with something a little bit bigger, though, even than that, and that is, I hope that all of you are going to go back and think some about points that have been made by absolutely everyone here, and I'm looking at Viviana, and I'm looking at Jasmine, because I can see them, but how a more diverse, now generation that is coming and will be here can help to develop, can make that more inclusive narrative about nuclear security, the reality, and ensure the full representation around the world and buy-in into the concepts of nuclear security. Make it valid going forward. Make it not something that was just yesterday, that is the affair of a small number of countries, but something that matters as an integral part of nuclear, if I could say. So thank you all so much. We've run about 10 minutes over, but it's because we've had such a great conversation. And thank you to each and every one of our speakers. Thank you to, of course, she's not here anymore, but thank you to Ambassador Jenkins. Thank you to Jasmine. Thank you to Viviana, to Jack and Ali. Also, thank you to, of course, Carolina and Louis and Mara, who you can't see, but has been doing a lot of other things, and everyone who's helped to put this all together, and the IT guys, without whom we would not be reaching all of you who are virtual, and we would not also be having Jack and Ollie involved. So thank you all. This has been great. And lastly, thank you to the audience. You're what makes it worthwhile. If we didn't have an audience, we'd be talking to ourselves, and we wouldn't have the good questions. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day wherever it is, and hopefully we'll see you again.